And we're back. This is the kickoff episode of Season 2 of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. On today's episode, we've got 3+3 things to share. We're going to talk 3 celebrations and 3 challenges from this past summer and give you a little bit of what you can expect in this season ahead, Season 2 of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, where we dive deep into theology, research, and practical wisdom for camps, retreat centers, and other key ministry spaces. I'm your host, Jared Rendell, camp enthusiast and part of the Sacred Playgrounds team. This podcast features Dr. Jake Sorensen, a scholar and practitioner who's helping leaders think more deeply about outdoor ministry and the impact it's making. Wander with us what God might have in store at your Sacred Playground. Hey, welcome to the playground, everyone. Here we are, Season 2. Jake, welcome to Season 2, my friend.
Thank you, Jared. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be relaunching this and trying again for a second season.
We were just looking at some of the stats and things from last season's episode. It's fun to see, some of them are over 100 episodes each, and there are 100 downloads each, and people are listening back through things. So that's fun. It's fun to see.
It's exciting to see engagement, and so I definitely appreciate that and think that we should continue doing it because people find value in it, and it's a fun way to get some of the data across and talk through some camp things and bring up things that might be on camp people's minds, and they can listen on the go, which I love about podcasts too.
Right? Because you still listen while training for marathons and things like that.
Oh yeah, I don't even listen to music that much anymore. I just throw on some podcasts, whether about camp or I've got my like space news podcasts that I like, and I've got a couple history podcasts that I like. So it's kind of some hobby things, and that's been fun.
Fun. Yeah. Well, like you said, you said a long time that your vision for any of this, stumbling into Sacred Playgrounds, it has been to deepen the conversation about camp, and this is one of the ways. So it's been fun. Did you make it to camp this summer?
Yeah, I made it to several camps this summer. It was fun. I got to head around to a couple of staff trainings or a few staff trainings, and then did some midsummer staff stuff at a camp, and did some VBS stuff, which is like a day camp. We basically did day camp in place of a camp, and that was
Sure.
an exciting experience. So I spent a whole week doing that, and my son participated in that too. So that was fun. He was a kind of a small group leader, and
Sure.
he got to be in the Sin on Back skit with me. So he was Sin jumping on my back, and that was kind of fun to kind of be camp counselors together.
At a moment. I love that.
How about you? Did you get out to camp?
I did get out to camp once, and it was good timing. It was a good week to be there. Both for us, and my kids got to go up, and it's like 7 hours from us. So this is not camp down the road, but I got to help out a little bit with a little bit of speaking and a little bit of music leading. So I got to do some of the stuff that I love, and my kids got to go to camp again, and now we're stuck. So we're driving 7 hours to camp apparently for the rest of our lives here because they're all in. I had some things to do, but I also got to just sit on the porch at one of the cabins for a while and think about all of the things that were going on. I was in the midst of a handful of change personally, and so it was really good.
So important, and that's something that we need to, keep talking about too, is we talk a lot about summer camp, but also camp's role in retreat and in getting time away for adults and for families. And so, it's more than just the children's summer camp programs. But of course, here at the end of the summer, the kids' summer camp programs are the things that are mostly on our minds and in our data sets.
Truth. Yep. So speaking of data sets, that's one of the things that, that the team has been up to a lot this summer. So let's give a little recap. What have we been up to here this summer? You talked about staff training. You got to spend some time, a couple of people on the team, you and Anna got to spend some time helping with some staff training.
Yeah, and then it's been the research projects, and so we've got a big group of camps for Effective Camp. And so we've got like 40 camps that are participating in that project this summer. And that has been really exciting, really fun, a lot to juggle as we try to get the camper surveys in and the parent surveys in.
Right.
And so it's been a really busy summer in terms of the data load that we're getting. And so we've got I think we surveyed 6,000 campers this summer and something like 2,500 parents. And then we also did a follow up to the staff study. And so we've got 500 summer staff that we heard from as part of that as well. So it's a big data set. We've got a lot of
Hmm.
stuff to dig through, which is exciting.
Yeah, that is good news. And then, right, part of what we do is crank out reports on all of that and bring that data together. Because part of the point, part of what I've always appreciated about this is it's not just research for sake of research. Right, take that research, and help it tell a story, and then even the next step to help these individual camps or sometimes as these groups of camps, which is some of the ones this summer, to make some choices and maybe make some changes based on actually learning something from the experience of these folks.
Yeah, that's been one of the most rewarding pieces of this work so far is helping individual camps find their stories of success and tell them in a new way to bring in new campers, new donor money, things like that, but also to identify programs where they can make some improvements. And so they say, something was off this summer to help them identify that so that they can make changes and then improve the camper experience, improve the parent experience, and improve their ministries for discipleship in the process. So that's been really rewarding in that way. And then for our listeners
Hmm.
here, the great thing is because we have so many camps that we work with, we get these large data sets so we can say something about the camping industry as a whole. And so I like doing that as well and sharing some of those things and some of the trends with the larger community.
Yeah, that's great. So we've got some stories to tell there, and over these next couple of weeks and months, what you're just talking about will roll out in different ways in different places. We'll talk about here on the pod. We'll put that on some of our pages and the website and things like that. So that's a heads up, folks, that we'll be sharing those stories as the data gets together. That's where we are right now, getting a lot of that data together. So we did some surveys. We're working on some data, some staff team updates this summer.
Yeah, we had to expand our staff, and I'm excited about finally expanding our staff in the way
Yeah.
that we did this summer because we had so many clients and so many different camps that we were working with. We brought on Kelsey Blinn to help with the research coordination and the data entry and some of the contacting of the camps and things like that. So she's been a big asset to the team. And it's finally fun to have you on board in a very intentional role, Jared,
Hmm.
as our director of innovation. Is that what we called it? Um,
Yeah,
and
communication and innovation, I think, is my official
communication and
title. I
innovation.
love
It's
it.
a
It's
it's a
so
it's a
good.
it's a, it's a worthy title for you, my friend. And so you've been part of the team since we started Effective Camp all
Mhm.
those years ago, and to have you on in an official capacity um, is really exciting for me. And I'm excited about what we'll be able to do and our capacities moving forward. So it's really exciting to um, not just be the only one sitting in my basement on a computer doing this stuff, but to have a team to work with on a regular basis. Um, that's been great.
So fun. And then, I mean, lastly, the last kind of little update thing I was thinking of is we got to do some dreaming at the end of the summer here about some of what's ahead, some of what
Yeah,
we're thinking about.
yeah, yeah. I'm excited about where that will lead us, and trying to respond to the needs of people in the church and people in camping ministry. So I think we've got some good ideas and some good direction, but we also have some good people to help with those
Hmm.
responses. So I'm excited about that.
All right, today we have 3 and 3 things to share. So let's dive in. Let's dive in right away. We've got 3 kind of challenges that we're going to talk about from this summer. This is a bit of right. It's our first episode post summer. Everybody's either recovering or have hopefully done so, and now they're looking ahead. So, like anything, we want to learn from our experiences, whether those are challenges or celebrations, and we're going to share 3 of each of those today. So let's start. Where do you want to start?
I always like to start with the celebrations because I think that frames things in a positive way and helps us see the challenges from the perspective of the things that we're celebrating as well. And so,
Amen.
you know, COVID was still a specter, but I think the big story about this past summer is that the specter of COVID has receded from kind of this all-encompassing concern to something that is there and something that is still a concern and a challenge. But we've now moved a little bit past that, or we're at least starting to see what the post-COVID reality is going to be. And so, in
Yeah.
terms of the celebrations, kind of in this in between sort of summer where we're starting to see COVID recede. First of all, it was a successful summer of ministry, and we can really see that in the data points. I can see that in the camp directors that I've spoken with, that they feel good about this past summer. So at the end of 2020 and 2021, there was a lot of pessimism. There was a lot of just people really tired. There was so much fatigue from those summers. There was a lot of mobility. There were people
Hmm.
saying, "Do I really want to keep doing this?" And at the end of this summer, it was a totally different feel. It felt like, in some ways, a normal summer where you're tired and you're exhausted, but in a good way. Like, it's not just we survived, we made it through, but we did it, and we did something great this summer, and we influenced a lot of lives this summer. And so it was it. I think framing that really positively is important, because this summer we were really able to focus on ministry. The people were nicer. There was less pushback from parents, and that was sometimes because we didn't have as many restrictions in place or changes from previous years, and so it felt like everything flowed a little better. But also people are getting more used to being back out in the world and in society. So people just being nicer to one another. There being more positive perceptions of camp and the parent perceptions. So I said that we surveyed over 2,000 parents, and to see the parent perceptions get more positive again, um, rather than some of the meanness that we saw in the last few years, um, is really a positive change, I think.
Hmm.
And so we always ask, on the parent survey, to rate the experience on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being worst experience imaginable, 10 being just this amazing superior experience. Um, and we're used to seeing the average above a 9, so somewhere between a 9 and a 10. And the last couple of
Sure.
years it's dipped below that a lot of times at a lot of camps. And so this year it was back up over 9. And so it's really good to see that back on par with previous years. So that's number one. We had a successful summer of ministry. We can celebrate that we did a good job at a lot of our camps.
Yeah, moving from makes a big difference when you can move. I mean, we know this as individuals and the brain science behind this. When you are in survival mode as an individual or as a group of people, there is only so much that that you can do, that you have capacity for in lots of ways. And so this move from survive and starting to lean into, hey, we can thrive again in as a ministry space and as a staff and all of that. So that's great. Okay, so number one, successful summer of ministry. Two.
Number two, the programs are back. These specialty
Woohoo!
programs, um, a lot of those got cut during the COVID years. We had to consolidate. We had to do a single program. We could only do one thing, or we had to do things
Hmm.
really differently. And so it was a real challenge to put all sorts of energy into um, combining these programs in weird ways, and to now be able to open it back up and say these beloved programs that we have at our camp, whatever that might be. Maybe it's music, art, and drama camp.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a hammock camp. Maybe it's the mission trip or service experience.
Hmm.
Maybe it's traveling day camp. A lot of those things came back this summer and were offered again, and were offered successfully. And so it felt more like a normal summer in that way as well. And so I think that's something to really celebrate. And that's where a lot of the appreciation came from too. So some of
Sure.
the previous years, there was pushback in, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? I want my kid to have this. And there was disappointment among the staff, among the campers. And this year, the programs are back, and it feels like we're running on all cylinders again. And so, again, that's maybe part of the successful part of the ministry. Um, but I think it's also something to celebrate that
It is.
we're back. We're doing these programs again. Some of these things that mean a lot to our campers and our parents.
The other related thing that we noticed was full schedules, right? There, for the most part, they were running a full slate of weeks where lots, even if they had a couple in 2020, and into 2021, lots still were at least shortening schedules and doing less weeks and things like that. So it seemed like that most had full schedules this summer.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of the camps moved in that direction. So
Yep.
definitely another thing to celebrate.
So two programs are back, schedules are full, and from that perspective, it feels sort of we're working toward normal, like you said. What about three?
Number three is enrollment is up. And so, there were these questions about, oh boy, after we're online, all these doing all these things, we're offering online camp programs in some cases. We've got online school. Are we going to get kids back to camp? Are they going to want to go back to camp after all these changes and transitions? And the answer seems to be yes. We're at least moving in that direction. So seeing enrollment increase from 2021 is a real positive thing. Some camps were back on par with where enrollment was in 2018 or 2019. And that is really exciting to see a rebound that quickly. Not every camp saw that quick of a rebound, but a lot of times that had to do with capacity. And we'll talk about that with challenges. But the really positive thing that we can see is that parents want to send their kids to camp, and they're looking for opportunities to do so. And so that we can expand our programs again, that we can, offer a full slate of activities, and that we can see that there are positive perceptions and a successful summer of ministry. I think we have a lot of momentum moving forward to go towards 2023.
So wherever you are, pop your poppers. These are our celebrations. You can insert your own sound effect here. We had number one, a successful summer of ministry. Right? We're moving out of survival mode. 2, programs and schedules are back. And 3, enrollment is up. These are things to celebrate, man. Those are great.
Absolutely.
That is good
Absolutely.
news. And it feels like it's just trajectory. At least that's what it seems like, in even camper and parent surveys and just what we hear camp staff talking about. It feels like trajectory. So we're still moving. That's good news. All right, so those are the things we wanted to celebrate. There were also still, and will always be, some challenges that went alongside. So let's highlight 3 of those. Where do you want to start?
So for challenges, I think the one that I heard most frequently when I was talking to directors, and when I was out there at the camps, the number one concern this summer was staffing.
Okay.
This wasn't the case at every camp, but across the camping industry, staffing was really a big concern. And so here we are. We're at a situation where we have full employment, right? Unemployment in the United States is under 4%. So it's a really low unemployment rate. Young people can get a job anywhere, and they can get it. The wages went up, and so they can get a job at a fast food restaurant for $15 an hour. And so that makes it a really challenging hiring environment. Plus, because so many camps had fewer activities and fewer programs in 2020 and 2021, they don't have as many potential returning staff. And so that's another hit to staff recruiting.
Big time.
So it was a really challenging staff recruiting season. It was a really challenging summer for a lot of camps that were short-staffed. Not every camp was short-staffed, but a lot of camps were, and that put a lot of pressure on the staff that were there. And it exacerbated some of the other challenges that staff were already having in terms of dealing with challenging emotional things and mental health things. And so the staffing was the number one thing, and I think it will be the primary concern of camps as we move forward to 2023. And so in a lot of ways, they have to start recruiting summer staff for 2023 right now.
Yeah, we'll do a recruiting episode, maybe sometime sooner than later, because I think there are also some fun, creative ideas for how recruiting can look different. Because part of those were circumstantial too, right? Like same thing that the traditional recruiting methods, returning staff saying, "Hey, come work at camp with me." Well, if that's already lower, that network is already a little bit hindered. 2, lots of colleges still weren't. They either hadn't brought these fairs back, these big tabling fairs. They either just didn't bring them back, or they were doing them a lot less, or less days, or whatever it is. So less of those access to big groups of these young adults was still there. So it was a perfect storm of making that really hard.
Yeah, it was a big challenge, and that put a lot of pressure on other things this summer. And so the staffing crisis has ripple effects on all the other things, including program success. So
Yeah.
that is challenge number one.
Yep. Okay. So staffing, and recruiting goes along with that. Challenge number one. What's number two? What did we hear this summer?
Number two was the mental health crisis. This is ongoing, and so it goes together with camper behavior challenges. But I think it goes deeper than that because the mental health crisis concerns primarily our summer staff, but there's also challenges with the campers, and so we've got um, really high percentages of staff reporting feelings of overwhelming anxiety, feelings of hopelessness, um, thoughts of self harm. We recorded these things in the Camp and Church Leadership Project last summer. And just looking at some of the follow up numbers, the numbers haven't improved that much from 2021 to 2022. And so there's a incremental improvement in terms of the percentages of staff that are reporting overwhelming anxiety at least monthly. So that's
Mm.
still about 2/3 of the summer staff that report feeling overwhelming anxiety at least monthly. And half of the staff reporting feeling very down or hopeless at least monthly. And then it's almost a third. It's just over a quarter that have reported thoughts of self harm. And so the mental health crisis is still very much here. It's hard to see how we're going to get past it. I think maybe there will be some improvements as we get more into better social circumstances for these young people. They get back to in-person schooling and things like that. Because remember, a
Hmm.
lot of a lot of schools in 2021, 2022, that school year, a lot of colleges were still online for at least part of it. And so the social atmosphere was very different still. And so hopefully we'll be getting past some of that, but it's going to be a long haul to work through some of these mental health challenges, and I think it's going to stay with us. The mental health challenges were already on a rise before COVID. COVID just exacerbated that, so we can expect
Hmm.
these to be continued challenges going forward, and things that we need to work on and address. But it really was a big challenge this summer again. Having too few staff exacerbates that,
It does.
and so you have staff that are struggling, and then you don't have enough staff, and so you can't give them adequate breaks. You can't give them a day off if they might really need it,
Right.
because you're short staffed, and you're asking more of them,
Hmm.
and that just stresses them out more. So that is a continued problem, and it's also a challenge with campers, and that it manifests itself in camper behavior, and so challenging
Hmm.
camper behavior is oftentimes the result of a challenging home life or challenging mental health concerns. And so that was a challenge again this summer. Probably not as big as the behavioral challenges in 2021,
Right.
because at least most of the campers were back in school, and so they had a little better social skills than they did in
Hmm.
2021. So, but it was still a big challenge.
We saw some camps be really intentional about trying to sort of stay ahead and do the things that we talked about a few times last season, right? Mental health stuff came up last season like crazy. We know a few groups of camps who did training sessions with Joy, who was on the podcast last season, and took big chunks of staff training, or they used in our Holy Ground piece there was that chunk on mental health, and they used that as part of their staff training. So good news is that we're lifting it up, and hopefully lots are being intentional about creating space for that care to happen.
Yeah, yeah. People are still addressing it, and they're
Yep.
they're they're really they're really starting to focus on it and say this is something that we need to be really aware of and address head on.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
so there is some good news there, but it's to acknowledge that it's a challenge, and it wasn't just at your camp; it was at camps around the country, and
Yeah.
we really
That
heard about
helps.
this summer.
Yeah. There's two. Number three.
Number three, I'm going to stay with COVID, because it was still a reality, and it is still a reality right now. But it was still a major challenge for some camps. There were some camps that had to cancel entire weeks of programming, because usually it was because of a COVID outbreak among their staff, and they just couldn't do
Couldn't
it.
staff
I
it.
mean,
Sure.
um, and there were there were challenges about, okay, when do you send a camper home? What are the testing requirements? And so there were still some of those things in the background, and sometimes in the foreground. And so in
Hmm.
some of the parent surveys, there were responses of, my kid came home and had COVID, you know, and the good news in that is that a lot of them were understanding, and they weren't saying, why didn't you do this? 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 It was just they wanted to be informed. And so
Hmm.
it's being treated now more as a common illness, something of concern certainly, but something
Yeah.
that we know it's out there, we know it's a possibility. Inform us when somebody is exposed,
Yep.
and most camps did a great job of doing that, but it was still, it's still a challenge to have that specter, hanging over the entire summer,
Hmm.
but then also quite a few camps that I've heard from, having to either cancel an entire week or multiple weeks of their programming, or sometimes sending entire groups of campers home. So
Yeah.
it was still a challenge.
It's still there. Yep.
And I say that as number three. And at the same time, there's an honorable mention in terms of the supply chain challenges and the
Hmm.
increased cost of especially food. And so that is a challenge. I don't think it was the top three challenge for most camps this summer, but it'll be an ongoing challenge, throughout this coming year, for budgeting issues. And so, and it's tough to know if food prices are going to come down much.
Hmm.
Um, but that's a reality, of course, that camps have, because they have to have food deliveries. Um, and at what point do they increase their prices? And so that'll be a
Right.
that'll be a budgeting challenge for a lot of our camps.
Yeah. Yeah. Truth. And maybe, which leads us a little bit to some of, okay, we're here, right? We're in the beginning of September. For lots there are retreat seasons ahead and things like that. And at the same time, we're already thinking ahead about next summer. So that leads us to a little bit of how can we're a spot now where we can do some things to address some of those, right? Whether that's as simple as if you had a supply chain challenge with something, order now, or whatever it is. Like there's some level of, it's hard to know numbers and things like that, but some level of planning ahead that we can do with related to some of these challenges.
Yeah, it'll be a budget thing for a lot of the camps.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out budget ahead of time. But yeah, you're absolutely right that this time of year is the creative time of year for our camp people, because right now, most of them do not have their schedule printed for next summer, so they're thinking about new programs, they're thinking about what they might do. And the great news is that most of us are feeling good about it. Most of us feel good that it
Right.
was a successful summer, and that we're moving in the right direction in terms of even in terms of a lot of these challenges. So there's challenges that we need to address, but there's also things that we can build on. So, what new programs are we going to do? What new opportunities can we reach out for the coming year? And so, I'm excited to hear from our camp director friends about some of the creative juices that are flowing,
Hmm.
and what new things they're going to be doing. I'm really hopeful that um, the traveling day camp experience will continue to expand, and that those that have not done it in the past will start thinking about it, um, and other specialty programs that they might
Hmm.
offer, or that they may be offered in the past, that their folks are clamoring for, um, and then also working to get ahead of some of these challenges, working to get ahead of the staffing crisis, working to get ahead of the mental health challenges and crisis. How are we going to address those things?
Hmm.
And then, as you said, the supply chain challenges too. Um, you know, what can we do with our suppliers? Are there ways to lock some things in, or to look at different suppliers, um, or simply what can we do in terms of the budget, and and
Hmm.
and helping constituents understand that. And I think constituents do. Like, everybody sees their grocery bills going up,
Right.
and
They feel
so
it.
when you say some of our costs have gone up, and we don't want to have to pass these costs on to the camper families, we want to be able to keep those prices reasonable. Um, a lot of times donors are willing to step up in those cases.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So we always like to leave, and you just sort of mentioned a couple of them as we start to wrap up. We always like to leave with with some action steps, with some things that we can do out of this. And you mentioned a couple of those, and some of it is this planning ahead right now. Your future self, will really appreciate some of your forethought here with these things. Again, whether it's budget, whatever it might be. So if you haven't gotten a chance, let me say it like this: if you haven't gotten the chance to name your own celebrations and challenges and write them down, and whether that's at least with your year-round staff, and I'd even encourage, send an email out to your summer staff and name these things. Put them in there. And maybe you're going to do the same thing that we just did. Maybe you've got 3 of each. To name and claim those is really good, and because they were all part of those, that will feel really good. In particular, with your year-round staff who are in that mode of planning and thinking and being creative. It's good to name these things. So if you haven't put these down, and if add this to your next staff meeting agenda, to name these things, to celebrate hard on those ones that were really good, and to name and think ahead a little bit about those challenges, because naming it first makes a huge difference for not. You get to May and you're like, oh yeah, we're still having a similar problem that we had, and we could have thought about that. So name and claim those things if you haven't yet with your staff.
Absolutely. And then turn to mission and vision. Okay, what are we looking forward to? What are we going to do for our new initiatives? What are going to be our priorities for the coming months? This is an exciting time for camps because they have more time and space to think and to dream. And so, unlike the last couple of years where people just felt exhausted and felt like the challenges were overwhelming, this year there's more opportunity for optimism and thinking about new things. So I'm excited to hear about those
and see how the data helps tell that story too, because we're already seeing
we're going to arm you guys with data as we continue. I think we're doing this every 2 weeks. Is that right?
Yeah. Here's what's ahead on the Playground Pod. Yes, we're going to put an episode out every 2 weeks is the plan, and there might be some bonus episodes in there, and that will go back and forth with an article on the website every off week of that. So we want to keep putting that out as we've got lots of data to crunch and things like that. There's lots to do on the back end here. But we've got stories to tell too. So between the podcast and articles on the website, both of these things are going to be good resources. So there's fresh stories and data coming every week. Every 2 weeks, it'll be in the form of the podcast. And so we'll see that now through probably May again it will be here. And so lots of good chances to listen. There are things to come. So here's some other stuff to expect from Sacred Playgrounds overall, and we'll share a lot of this on the podcast. There's new data to share, and that will be coming. We've talked about that. There will be some new interviews with folks that are either in or around this outdoor ministry world, and then the plan is more of you. So we're gonna reach out and get some things from you, get some ideas, but even more some stories from you. So heads up, if you've ever wanted to be on a podcast, be ready. And then the last thing about you is that we want your podcast ideas. If you've got a question, right? We know people will call Jake and say, "Hey, I want to know about this. Do we have research? Do we have data? Do we have an article? Do we have something on this?" We'll talk about some of those things. So if you have an idea for this podcast that we might do during this season, we want to hear about that too. So you can head to sacredplaygrounds.com and send us a message there, or find us in some social space or whatever it might be. So that's some of what's ahead on the podcast.
Awesome. I'm excited about the weeks and months to come. Right now, I am deep in the data, and I'm excited to get some more of the findings and share those with everybody.
Great kickoff, Jake. Always good to chat with you. Everybody, we'll see you next time on the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. This episode was produced by me, Jared Rendell, and featured Dr. Jake Sorensen, lead researcher and founder at Sacred Playgrounds, LLC. Our theme music was written and performed by Taylor Wilson. You can find his original songs wherever you get your music. Learn more and connect with the Sacred Playgrounds team at sacredplaygrounds.com.